Hello, everybody. Hello, Bettina. How are you?
Hi, Eric. Hi, everyone. I'm doing well, I guess. We were just talking about that before we logged on. And yeah, it's that kind of, I don't know. Um, Christmas is over, New Year's hasn't started. And as I was just saying to you, it's like you feel like the year is over, but the new year hasn't really started. It's kind of like a limbo place where you're neither here nor there. And you don't really want to start anything new, but you don't want to be idle. Or it's a very, very interesting place to be in, and one that's very difficult to describe.
Yeah,
So
and as we film this, it's December 29th. And so it's, 4 days from Christmas, and it's still 3 days away from the New Year and that celebration. And I feel like, I'm 37. I've had this vacation every year. Most people, you know, hopefully, have had this week off for most of their lives. Whether it be going to school or having a job, and it's kind of the weird mandatory 1 week off where you have this big celebration, and then you kind of come down from it and you eat poorly. You have all the leftover cookies and everything, and then you're waiting a couple more days for New Year's. So it's not like a regular week off you would enjoy, let's say, at the end of May. It's got a different feel to it, where you're kind of bookended by two celebrations, um, 2 days sometimes where we abuse our bodies, and it's a slowdown period, and that can feel odd. And it can feel odd because a lot of things aren't open, a lot of things aren't available, and it kind of forces you to slow down. But sometimes if you slow down enough, you kind of get excited to start new things, but you kind of feel hamstrung, and it's kind of a strange place to be, to sit with emotions. And it does seem to feel the same year after year, this little week in between Christmas and New Year's.
yeah, and I think that's interesting that you say that you slow down and you don't do much. And I think we need more of that, because I
Hmm.
think what happens is, in that slowing down, in that sitting in the nothingness, you're giving yourself space for things to come up. And if you're used to always being busy, then you're not used to things coming up. And so it seems to come by surprise, even though it shouldn't be
Right.
that much of a surprise. So I think that has something to do with it. I think it's that. And, there's lots and lots of people who have trouble with this time of year for whatever reason. Um, I I love Christmas, so it's not Christmas that's a problem. I think it's that it's been a while since I've sat in the stillness, and there's been a lot of transformation happening for me this year. And so um, it's sort of the culmination of all of that, and the sort of the realization of it, and the certain amount of grieving over letting go of certain things, and that not knowing what will come next, or how things will be without that. Um, yeah, it's kind of like, I mean, every year on New Year's Eve, I do a sort of year in review, and I take out my journal, and I just sort of go through the previous year, and I just write about everything that happened during the year, and things that I learned, and different changes I made, and realizations I had, and all of that. And then I write my intentions for the new year, not resolutions, but intentions for the new year. And then I'm good to go. Um, and I think this is sort of the moving into that, just sort of reviewing and recognizing how much has been let go of. And that does, even if it's a good thing that you're letting go of something, I think there is a grieving process that happens, because um, you've traveled your life with this pattern, or this idea, or this belief, and it's been a constant companion. And when we have the realization that it's not in our best interest anymore, and we let it go, we do have to grieve that loss and that change. And it's not a bad thing. It's just something that happens. And, I think we all go through it, and there's certain things that trigger it and certain things that that sort of bring it to the surface for us. So
Mm-hmm.
that may be what it is. I don't know. And I'm sure that there's lots of people out there that can relate to that and have probably experienced that in their lifetime. So
Yeah. I mean, something that's been kind of culturally ingrained into us is this idea of the New Year's resolution, and whether or not you participate in that. Sometimes it is, you come to this point of the year and you think about where you were last year, and if you had any resolutions, and how quickly you got rid of them at the start of the year. And yeah, it's kind of a neat time, yeah, especially with the contrast of Christmas behind, where there's just such a ramp up. The days leading up to Christmas are full of excited energy, and ramping up to have everything ready for a couple of days of celebration. And then, especially off the back of that, the contrast of that, the slowdown of the 28th, the 29th, the 30th. Yeah, it can really feel palpable. But it's really useful. We talk on the show all the time about slowing down and reevaluating. And yeah, there can be lots of things that come up as a result of that. You can feel disappointment, or you can feel like some of the things that you didn't accomplish, or some of the things that have changed for you in the year. And you can also feel excitement for things that you might want to take on next year. Or so it's always good to slow down and reevaluate. And sometimes we can get flooded with these emotions and flooded with these feelings of what has happened. And it can be a good thing to, you can use it as an opportunity to decide what it is you want going forward. And I think if we use it like that, we can kind of use this time and sometimes the lull that we feel in a really positive way.
yeah, and I think one of the traps we fall into is that we feel, what would be deemed as negative. Here I am with my air quotes again, but deemed as negative emotions, and we tend to push them away or busy ourselves so that we don't feel
Hmm.
them. But it's a good thing. It's a good thing to be able to feel them. It's a good thing to just sit in that quiet and allow them to come up, and know that it's okay to feel them. It may feel like the end of the world, but let it feel like the end of the world. Let it be whatever it needs to be in that moment, because I think I said earlier, I was feeling resistance. I was feeling that pushing back against it. It's like, I don't want to feel this way. I don't want to feel this way.
Hmm.
But in reality, there's nothing wrong with feeling this way. It's just another emotion that's working its way through. So, I think it's really important to be okay with it, to know that's part of the process, and to know that it's part of life as a human being.
Yeah. Yeah, having these things come up, it really is a unique week, because even if we have like an extended weekend, there's usually, because it's a holiday or some sort of celebration, whether it be like Easter or Labor Day, civic holiday, all these kind of things. And even if we take a week off work, we can usually find things to busy ourselves when these feelings come up. If we have too much time to slow down, we can find something to do. But yeah, this week is kind of devoid of stimulus, and it can sometimes have us wallow a little bit in our emotions as a result.
Yeah, and like I said, wallowing, there's nothing wrong with wallowing. I mean, you don't want to over dramatize it, and you don't want to hold on to it and make it part of your identity. I mean, that's not the idea. The idea is to move through it, but you definitely don't want to push against it, because that will cause a whole set of problems on its own. So it's a very contemplative place, um, and I really kind of like that place. It might be the fiveness in me, but I do kind of like that contemplative place where you're just being with your thoughts and your feelings, and um, just seeing where they go and what they do, and how they pull you along, or how they move through you. I find it really interesting.
Yeah.
So, um, and I can go into distraction, and I'm trying not to do that, to just be with it. It's hard. It's
Yeah.
really hard. It's, because your first inclination when you start to feel not so great is to find a way to avoid it, find a
Hmm.
distraction, find something to, take your mind off it. And, we do that with our little kids too. When they start to have a temper tantrum, we hand them a toy or something to eat to sort of distract them from what they're feeling. And, now I did it when my kids were little, but now I think I would not do that now. I would let them sit in the whatever it was, the muck and mire of their emotions until they were done, you know? And I think we need to parent ourselves that way and just sit with ourselves in that messy place and be whatever it is that we are being in this moment, because that is also a part of um, the expression of um, of our humanness, and yes, perhaps of the ego, but you won't beat the ego by fighting it.
Hmm. Yeah.
you know so so there's no point in trying that. um, but yeah, just to say, okay, have your moment, but I'm not gonna follow you down that rabbit hole. um,
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's that great. Well, we've brought that up many times in the show. You can't solve a problem at the level at which it was created. So you can't solve the ego problem at the level of the ego. It just is not going to work. You're just going to spin yourself in circles. And I think you bring up an interesting point about how we're parented like that when we're little. About how that distraction. If we're upset, we get promised a dessert, or we get the adult tries to change our focus onto something else. And I think sometimes, when we look at ourselves, and if we can get to the second level where we see where we use distraction to not feel things, we can feel bad about that even. But sometimes it's useful to realize when these things aren't necessarily our fault, and how early they are ingrained in us, how early they are ingrained in our developing mind, our childhood mind. Where if you're feeling bad, then a dessert can get you out of it. Or finding something new, or shiny, or a new toy or something, or reintroducing something into you or into your focus. So you never actually really process what was going on. You never get encouraged. I would say almost all of the time. I'm sure sometimes it happens, but encouraged to talk through your feelings, talk through your frustration or anger, and you're just distracted. So this is a behavior that we play out as adults as well. Plus, also it feels good and it's reliable, but it never actually solves a problem that comes back up in our lives all the time. But when we realize sometimes that it's not necessarily our fault why it's there, it can be you can use a little bit more self-compassion, to deal with that habit that you have. And one thing I like that you brought up, and I know that you've done this for years, is when you talk about like your year end or your year in review that you do consciously, talking about how you journal and you write down things that happen, both good and bad, and you set your intentions going forward, rather than this New Year's resolution, which is really quite laughable. How dumb it is to just sit here on a week before the new year and tell yourself that once January 2nd comes, I'm going to use willpower to change this aspect of my life. And it's how many times do you need to fail at that before you realize it's a poor strategy? But I really like what you've done, and I know that knowing you for 7-8 years, that you do this kind of year in review, and you sit down and sit with it. And I think it's a much more intelligent and emotionally intelligent way to go about setting your intentions, to kind of bring it back, using these slowdown times to decide what it is that you want in life.
Yeah, and I think the difference is that setting an intention, as in, like, sometimes, and it's funny because every year I've looked back, and many, many years, there's a lot of my intentions are the same.
Mhm.
And it doesn't mean that I haven't achieved my goals. And it's not about goal setting. It's about setting an intention to continually grow and change and deepen and be more conscious. In the end, that's really what it is. So if one of my intentions happens to be, I want to be more compassionate or I want to be more loving, then I'm putting out there that whatever the lessons are that I need to become more compassionate or to become more or to be more loving, I'm accepting. I'm asking for those lessons. I'm asking for that guidance and that direction as to how to find my way to being more loving or more compassionate. Um, which is different than saying, oh, I'm going to be nicer to people, and then you're actually trying to do
Hmm.
the resolution, as opposed to being in that space of. So I think that's where I'm trying to do that differently. Is I want to be in the space of love. I want to be in the space of being more compassionate and being more connected to my loving presence. And I can only do that through being conscious and aware of, my reaction to things that are happening around me that cause me to pull away from my loving presence.
Right. Yeah, that's a key awareness. I do like how you make the distinction about being and doing. I wrote that down just as you started talking because I saw that's the direction you were going, and then you talk about rather than doing New Year's resolution, it's more so just being, more in the direction of what it is that you want to become, or how you want to live, or how you want to interact with the people around you and the people that you love. And I do think it's really important to have that awareness, to be able to find out, something. If somebody would like to adopt this process, after watching the show about journaling, writing down their year, setting their intentions going forward, not so much in accomplishing something, but more just being it more often, it can also be really useful to journal and write down the ways in which we get triggered out of those. Because anything that we set forward, that we want to be more loving, more compassionate, more patient, more kind, more seeking to understand another person's perspective before putting our own on, uh, being less defensive, all these things. We've all been in that state before. We've all been in that state many times this year, some more than others. And writing and thinking about the ways in which we get pulled out of that can be really useful, to look at places in our life where we have repeating triggers, and whether that repeating trigger environment can be changed, or whether we can change our response to it, can be a really useful practice to double the amount of times that we feel all those wonderful things, all those things that we set our intention of being more loving, compassionate, patient, kind, um, just being a better, creating better energy for the people around us and for ourselves to live within, of primary importance.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, you know when you're being triggered, whether you deny it or not, because we don't like to think that we don't like to admit when we're angry. Some people do, but
Hmm.
for the
Hmm.
most part, anger is not a very desirable trait that we like to admit to. And so we tend to, go into that denial. But we know when we're triggered, we know what makes us angry and takes us away from our peace. And for me, I want to spend more time in my peace. And that may mean being okay with feeling my anger. you know, it doesn't necessarily mean not feeling angry. It just means being okay and loving myself anyway, even if I am feeling angry, and knowing that it's not a bad thing as long as I don't start taking it
Hmm.
out on, everyone around me. And even if I do take it out on everyone around me, I need to, I need to bring in that forgiveness and really get beyond it, because it will just become a downward spiral of beating myself up and
Hmm.
then looking in the world to feel better about myself. And
That's right.
yeah, that's not the way to peace and freedom.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny how that system works, where we spiral downwards like that, where we beat ourselves up for beating ourselves up almost. And then we look to distraction to get out of it, whether that be spending, eating, doing any one of the poor distraction habits that we have. It's really kind of funny how we create everything. and then we
Yeah.
respond to it, and then we can respond to it in a negative way, and then we get upset at ourselves for responding to it in a negative way, and then we feel bad. It's just it's hilarious, and the only person doing it is ourselves. It's just this disconnect in this relationship with ourselves. I like what you bring up about we don't want to admit when we're angry. We don't want to admit. I mean, how many times? I mean, it's funny when you think about how many times you've said to somebody else, like, "Why are you so angry?" And they're like, "I'm not angry." "Why are you yelling?" "I'm not yelling." You know, it's this denial that we have these feelings. We know that we don't want to be having them, but we still sit in quiet, and in the internal dialogue, we justify it to ourselves. And usually, when I've been in that position where I've been angry and I've been challenged with it, like, "Why are you angry?" You're like, "Why are you yelling?" It's because I'm not communicating effectively. And I'm not communicating effectively with myself. I'm just frustrated and want to shut it out. And I'm certainly not then taking the next step and communicating that effectively to anybody who might be present as a result. And that admitting it, and like you say, having it be okay, but being able to relax in that moment and have the dialogue with yourself first to say, okay, what is going on? Why am I upset? And then how can I communicate this in a loving way? Um, really helps dissipate it, and it actually solves the problem. It actually solves that frustration. And we talk about repeating triggers. Oftentimes it's repeating triggers that cause us to get all stressed and tight in ourselves. And we don't want to say anything because we kind of don't know how to say it. And taking that time to talk to yourself, to ask yourself what's coming up. That's why journaling and sitting with it and writing things down is so useful, because it helps us have that dialogue with ourselves so that we can be better equipped to have that dialogue with others when the triggers come up, when there's more than just me around.
Absolutely. And I mean, anger is a really good one to talk about because it's so out there, but anger is really just a mask for our vulnerability. And I
That's right.
think if we can keep that in mind, it can help us to sort of put the anger aside so that we can look at the truth of what's actually happening. I'm angry right now, but I'm angry because I'm feeling this vulnerability that I can't express.
Mm-hmm.
And I want you to just know my vulnerability without me having to express it, because that puts me in a weakened place.
Wow, that's really well said.
Right.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so then we get angry um, as a protection. But
Mm-hmm.
people are not mind readers, and we have to express ourselves when we feel vulnerable and when we're feeling. And it is not a sign of weakness to express our vulnerability. We just believe it is. I think it takes great courage to express vulnerability, and
Yes.
and I think having courage is a good way to deal with the anger. Is to have that courage and to recognize that sharing of that vulnerability as courage, and realize anger is more weakness than a strength, and
Mm-hmm.
just see the reality of it, that anger is not a strength, um, because it doesn't take any courage to be angry,
Mm-hmm.
really.
Yeah.
That's just an
Definitely.
expression of weakness.
Yeah. Yeah. And cowardice, because you're not willing to confront it in yourself first, let alone confront it to whoever may be in front of you that may have triggered it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I really like what you said there. I think you said that really, really well. And I would, I'd hit the reverse button and go back 2 minutes to hear that again, because you put it really well. Having this feeling of vulnerability, then feeling stuck in it, not knowing what to do because I'm starting to feel vulnerable and I can't express it, and I don't feel safe, or I don't trust it, or I don't even know what it is. I just feel it,
Mhm.
and then we revert to anger as a result. That was really good, really well said. But we somehow used up the half hour already. So if if you would like to finish us off with a meditation, that'd be fantastic. Bettina, send us off into the new year and let us sit with these slow few days before we celebrate New Year's and then get back to regular life.
To the real world. All right, let's close our eyes. Take a deep breath. And breathing into that space within us where loving presence sits silently and still allowing us to be and do and say whatever it is we need to be and do and say in this moment, and still remaining constant, always there, always waiting to catch us when we fall and remind us of who we are. And as we head into this new year, let us have the intention simply to be more connected to our loving presence, to remember more often who we are, to take ourselves beyond the anger to the truth of our vulnerability, and have the courage to share that with those we love, so that we can have more open and loving communication, not only with ourselves, but with those in our lives that we care about, so that we have relationships that are kinder, loving, deeper, more compassionate. And so that as we walk through this world, we can be the expression of loving presence, especially for those who are calling for love in our day-to-day lives. And then when you're ready, wiggle your fingers and your toes and bring yourself back to the world.
That was really good. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. Well, everybody have a safe and happy New Year's, and we'll see you all next week.
Have a great week, everyone.